Hello and welcome to the Go Narrative stream. I'm super excited to have you here today. It's been a crazy couple of months, right? We had the holidays, we had January, and if you were in my family, you had COVID in January, which has been a lot of interesting times, to say the least. Last week, we were on with, was it 2 weeks ago? We were on with Jeff Leisovitz, and we were talking about Docutronica. We've got a little snippet of that for you later on in the presentation as well. So that's a bit of fun. And today we've got something for the entrepreneurs and the product marketers in the audience. That's right. So we are going to teach you how to generate demand and accelerate sales with storytelling. That's right. Now, the great thing about this is we are not going to be teaching you. I'm not going to be covering all of the complicated entertainment frameworks. And you know what I mean. The hero's journey, Pixar's tips. I mean, there's a lot of stuff in these models, right? And anybody who's tried to learn about storytelling, whose job isn't making movies or writing novels, or even if that's your hobby, if you're not doing stuff like that and you want to tap into the power of storytelling, this is kind of what you come across. This is what's out there. And you might find the occasional example where this has been taken and tried to apply to business, but it's still using those old and tired techniques for storytelling and entertainment. And that is not what we're talking about today. So, but the good thing is I've got something for both groups that might be on this stream today. If you are a natural born storyteller and you love the hero's journey and you just can't get enough of sitting down when you watch a movie and picking apart the structure of that movie, and if you're like me, you end up inadvertently training your children to do so and then having to tell them when they need to back off a little bit because they're actually ruining the movie. Maybe I'm ruining the movie as well when I do it. Anyway, so if you are a natural expert storyteller, then you are going to get something out today. And that something is how to actually go and use that in your job. Okay. And then if you're completely new to storytelling, well, we've got something for you as well. We've got the on-ramp, the simple frameworks, in fact, the simplest framework for storytelling that I have ever seen. I challenge anybody to show me one that's simpler. And by the way, beginning, middle, and end doesn't count. So don't even bring that one to me. So if you're a complete noob, that's fine as well. We've got some great stuff for you here today. And we do run this stream weekly, apart from last week and a few times over the holidays and COVID period, because I just wasn't, quite frankly, up for putting my face in front of you lovely people, but I am now, and we will be doing that regularly going forward. So come back next week. If you don't have questions today, that's fine as well. You can come back and we can answer those whenever. You can also ask those online, Twitter, at Matt Widget is easier than Matthew Widget with the two W's, seemed a bit weird in the middle there. So at Matt Widget, and then also on LinkedIn as well. So, and don't forget, there's a bunch of other content that we've got there to help you with all of this. So the big thing though, is all of this comes together in this top secret thing that I've been working on for the better part of a decade. And that is storytelling for action. And we've got all the parts for storytelling for action for you today. And those are frameworks that you can immediately start going and using. Now, as a marketer and entrepreneur myself, I know how frustrating business can get. I mean, there's just so much that you have to juggle, right? I spent 20 years over 20 years in corporate America, Intel and Microsoft primarily. And so I know what that's like. And I also know running a small business, they've both got their own challenges. But the moral of the story is work, as Watsky says, lots and lots of work, and you've got a lot to do. So even as a passionate storyteller, I actually struggled to apply storytelling in business. You know, there's so much that you've got to manage, right? You gotta think, oh my goodness, Matthew, like, how am I going to fit storytelling into that as well? Well, we're going to change that for you today. And I'm super excited because I just know how much value you'll get out of this, because I've got value out of this. Our clients get value out of this, and I love it. So hopefully you'll be able to pick up on something today. Now, You also might think that, hey, I've got all these channels I need to worry about. I've got to learn these new channels, the latest, greatest social media channel or whatever it is, right? Oh no, the metaverse. What are we going to do in the metaverse? That's the latest, right? And the thing is none of those things matter if you don't get your story straight. You need to do that first, and then you can go on and focus on how you're going to get that message, that story out to your clients and customers and even your audiences. So, like many of you, actually, for the longest time, I thought that storytelling was reserved for movie and theater. And when it came to business, I didn't think that storytelling explicitly had a place in business. But over time, I have actually come to learn that it does, and it's all over the place. And it looks like we're getting some messages coming in on Restream. So actually, you know what I'm going to quickly just do here is make sure that I can see those messages when they're coming in. And if I can find the right button, that is. Here we go. So, I've learned that actually not only is storytelling everywhere in business, it actually props up business. Like the sales teams, for example, you're not going to be able to sell something to somebody unless you've got a really good story. And you're not going to be able to engage people with your marketing campaigns if you don't have a really good story. And the challenge with a lot of this stuff is, okay, how do I get consistency in that story? How do I get consistency in all the stories so that those marketers and that those sales folks on our teams are all telling stories that actually are consistent, right? You don't want people telling different stories, do you? I mean, maybe you do. I like our team to all be singing from the same hymn sheet, and I'm sure you do as well. We just think about brand guidelines, for example, right? So I've come to learn that storytelling props up business in all sorts of ways across the board. Even if you're trying to have a conversation in the finance team and you're trying to articulate the meaning behind some trends or some numbers or some shifts in the market, you have to have a story to help communicate that. And so one of the questions that just came in is, well, so tell us a bit more about your background. Like, was it all corporate America? Well, I'll go back even a bit further than that. So my mother was a scientist. She was a biologist focused on virology and zoology. And if she was alive today, she would have been fascinated with what's been going on and really saddened by what's been going on in the world over the past couple of years with COVID, because she was studying this stuff years and years ago. She taught my sisters and me to ask questions, right? To develop hypotheses, to test our ideas. We were taught to seek facts, data, and truth. But on the other hand, she was also a poet and an author. And my father reinforced both of these kind of dichotomies. He was an electrical engineer who then ended up enjoying a sales and marketing career spanning 5 decades in high tech, specifically Intel, which was what got me hooked on Intel. And he inadvertently indoctrinated me into the world of technology. And I grew up surrounded by tales of Silicon Valley. And in fact, I highly recommend this book, Accidental Empires. It is a lot of fun and kind of goes behind the scenes of a lot of what was happening in the early days of Silicon Valley. And who doesn't like a good behind the scenes story? Although I tell you what, I have become soured on a behind the scenes story. Netflix's Drive to Survive, being a massive F1 and auto racing and car fan, because that just came down to an absolute travesty it's about 7 weeks ago in the final laps of the final race of the season, because they were pursuing entertainment, right? So behind the scenes are great, but don't use behind the scenes to change reality. The behind the scenes of Accidental Empires, however, really does report from the front lines of what was happening behind the scenes in Silicon Valley. And it's a lot of fun. Now, another thing that we experienced was our parents read to us voraciously. This is actually the original copy it's the first time that Lord of the Rings was published. All the Lord of the Rings books were published in one volume. And this was my mum's copy. And I actually have this wonderful memory I treasure of my father reading it to me and my sister curled up on the settee and recently read it to my children as well. So it's in the family, if you will. So I took this passion for science, I took this passion for writing and storytelling and technology, and I channeled it into a career in marketing and in high tech. And all the way back, this is like 20 years ago or so. Any Red Dwarf fans in the audience at all? It's about, yeah, this is 2002. This is actually exactly 20 years ago. It's from an Intel Counter-Strike gaming event that I helped manage at the Science Museum. There's that science again, in London. And yes, that's Rimmer from Red Dwarf. So, one of my claims to fame, of course. So anyway, I in the early days of my career, I really thought that any storytelling in business was best suited for presentations, ad campaigns, and messaging. I never saw it as being something that could be applied in other areas of the business or across the business. And I definitely didn't see it as a tool that could be used daily, which I've come to learn that it is. But one thing that I did experience at Intel and then carried that torch for my whole career is Jeffrey Moore's Crossing the Chasm. I fell in love with this idea, and this idea specifically of these different types of markets. And importantly, the difference between these two kind of early slices of market, the innovators and the early adopters, and the big gap, the gulf, the chasm between them, the early adopters, if you will, because they're the next one after innovators, and the early majority. And the reason is, just a quick summary, the early adopters actually look to the innovators for ideas, right? And then look at ways to apply that to their business. And they're actually interested in those stories and interested in that particular narrative that's happening within the technology and how it can be used. And they're just passionate about technology for technology's sake. The same can't be said for the early majority. And in fact, the early majority look at those early segments of the market and go, dude, that is not who are these people? Who are these geeks or these dorks, these technologists? That's not that come on, I'll wait for a bit until this stuff's been proven out. And that is at the crux of what the chasm is. And by the way, I'm a geek and a dork, so I can absolutely say that. So you shouldn't take any offense there. And if you do, you can just tune out right now. So anyway, the early majority look to each other for references. So they look to the stories that their friends and their colleagues are experiencing. And from that, they then get whipped up into adopting the things that their colleagues and their friends are using. So how do you get a new technology into that? Well, you don't have any connective tissue between the early adopters and the early majority. So you have to come up with some stories to frame it. And I didn't realize at the time that this was the first of many steps I was to take on my storytelling and business journey, which led to me creating Storytelling for Action for You as a way to unlock how to do that and how to do it consistently every day in your business, no matter what you're working on. So for me, some early examples of work that I did in the space where I was using storytelling implicitly, not even really focused on trying to use storytelling. Here is a superhero theme for a campaign that we ran for our partner account managers at Intel globally. We did a lot of readiness, and this was a theme that we used at the big sales meeting and out in the regions and all that good stuff. And here's another example. This is a personal favorite of mine, James Bond style sales campaign. And in this case, I did spend, as a product marketer for much of my career, I spent a lot of time doing sales enablement. And in this case, we had to convince a certain portion of the sales force that something was really important that they had to focus on. And they weren't really getting paid for that. So we had to show them how not focusing on this would hurt what they were getting paid for. And a spy, a James Bond kind of style themed campaign was exactly the right solution for that. And it was a raging success and it was super fun as well. But again, I wasn't explicitly trying to use storytelling. So what I'm hoping I can impart to you and give to you today is Storytelling for Action as a way to do that with intent. So eventually these efforts actually led to me being recruited as chief storyteller for Microsoft Dynamics, just as I was actually planning on leaving the company. Wow, I thought it was official. I was actually going to get paid to be a storyteller. finishing my novels can wait. And yes, I do have 2 science fiction novels, like 160,000 words or so each, and they take a lot of editing. So career, family, those types of things, unfortunately, mean that there's still some work to be done on those. But I was actually going to get paid for it by working at Microsoft as chief storyteller for Dynamics. So I was super excited. Now, I didn't realize that the journey I was about to embark on would actually help me unlock a big business secret. And that secret is not about entertainment storytelling at all. Business storytelling may be related to entertainment storytelling, but it's different. And I'm going to share with you today why it's different and how to actually use it. At Intel, a friend and mentor of mine, Nick Drew, once said to me, if you can find a framework or somebody's done something before so you don't have to reinvent the wheel, then you should do that. And so I immediately in this role started to look for wheels. And I found this wheel in Slovenia and took this photo, but I couldn't find a wheel to apply storytelling in business. And in those early days, I really struggled. I found all the classic storytelling advice and I was trying to figure out how to apply that to business. And I was on the hunt for tools to use storytelling in business so I could be that champion in our organization for storytelling. And I found little bits and pieces here and there, but I just couldn't find something that was really focused. And what I did find is that most people who were trying to apply storytelling in business lean into entertainment storytelling. Now, to be clear, there are some really interesting voices and advice out there when it comes to this that have some use to them, but they're very, very focused. They're very specific. And most of them, quite frankly, are around 2 subjects: presentations and personal development. And here are actually two of my favorite examples. In fact, in particular, Nancy Duart's resonate. I really, really enjoyed this. She breaks down these speeches, presentations, like Martin Luther King Jr., for example, and some Steve Jobs presentations, and she breaks them down and the beat and this, but she uses this entertainment focus, this filter, if you will. And so I wasn't able to apply that to everything. Yes, we could use that to help when I was creating a keynote for one of my executives, but it wasn't helpful for creating a case study, for example. Now, based on my role, I was able to kind of play that and use these various tools and kind of square peg round hole it to a degree. But the hero's journey was just, I don't know if you know much about the hero's journey. Some of them are 10, 12 steps. The actual full-blown monomyth, as it's called, Joseph Campbell's monomyth, 17 steps. 17 steps. 17. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. Oh my goodness, you're going to remember 17 steps to help you build a better presentation, to help you come up with a series of tweets for a campaign, for an ad, for a 30-second ad. You're going to remember all of this stuff. Now, if you love this stuff and you spend your time geeking out on this stuff like I do, and you do it as well, more power to you. However, I guarantee you, you are not the only type of person out there. And I know for a fact that a lot of you who are listening today want some simple tools to apply this, to benefit from the power of storytelling. And there's this wonderful book I read called Made to Stick by the Heath brothers, Chip and Dan. And they talk about this idea of the curse of knowledge. Now, curse of knowledge happens in every business. I remember being at Microsoft and we would have this term about, and I forget the exact zip code of Microsoft, but it would say it's 98526 or whatever, syndrome, because it's like focused on us, thinking about us. We need to get out, we need to focus externally. And the curse of knowledge is very much that. You have so much to learn about your business and your products and your partners and your customers. You can get lost in this curse of knowledge. And it's a curse because it means everything that you do is tailored not actually externally, but is actually tailored more internally. And this gets worse and worse and worse the bigger a company gets. But I tell you what also suffers from this: storytelling. And I've experienced this myself as I started to learn about storytelling. It's a slippery slope, and you go deeper and deeper and deeper. And whilst there's power in storytelling, I am trying to change how we think about business storytelling. I want all of you to be able to leverage its power. I want you to be able to use it. I don't want it to be this esoteric thing that's locked up on the mountain of Joseph Campbell's monomyth that you have to go on a journey and return to bring back. Exactly. So that's some of the terminology that you'll get within that type of material. So I just couldn't find a wheel that was working, right? They just weren't rolling. It was a flat on one side. They were bare. They were falling off the cars. The wheels were falling off the car. So I did what I had to do because I had a job to do, and I became a story interpreter. Kind of all this knowledge and information on one side, and then working with the business for our case studies, for our videos, for our keynotes, or for our campaigns, for our content, all of that. Even understanding our customers, I used all of these frameworks and was like the living, breathing version of it. And it was actually through that process that we did some really cool content. We created some really powerful, award-winning content, but I was looking for something much more. And I was discovering more and more that the power of story wasn't limited to entertainment. It's because it's how we as humans connect. And business, the last time I checked, is still human to human. I run a marketing consultancy, a boutique agency, whatever you want to call it. Not a big fan of labels generally, but if somebody doesn't like me, they're not going to want to work with our business. If somebody doesn't like my team, they're not going to want to work with our business, again, because business is still human to human. And I have realized that storytelling plays an essential role in that human to human connection. And the more I learned about the science of it, the more I dug into it, the more I understand why that's the case, and have used all that to create simple frameworks. And I'm always up to geeking out about it. But things like Will Storr's The Science of Storytelling, and talking about how our brain processes information, how it puts us in the center of the story that we're living and breathing. These are all reasons why storytelling is so valuable. And those are powers that can be brought into business as well. But I wanted to do more than just inject a bit of story by using the hero's journey for videos we were creating, or Nancy Duarte's Resonate for a keynote that we were creating. I was starting to wonder, what does actual business storytelling look like? And if I could figure that out, I could unlock something truly powerful. And I was actually getting pulled in different directions internally at Microsoft at the time. Last I heard, there was actually still a training that I was featured in, because I wanted to spread the word around Microsoft. And it was at that time I also started to think, I wonder if I could do this for more than just Microsoft. But I had our second child, who had just been born, a young family at home. My wife was on a sabbatical from her career after his birth. Quitting didn't really feel like an option. And unfortunately, then Outlook decided to reboot and cover my screen here. But unfortunately, even something worse than that, and that was July the 19th, 2015. Everything changed. Tragedy struck. Now, I'm not going to go super deep into this story, but my parents were killed in a car crash, and it became, in storytelling language, the inciting incident that changed the rest of my life. And those dreams about moving on and going and taking my storytelling passions outside of just one company started to become something that became very important to me. And it was very much a turning point in my life. And if you're going through any grief, and know that you're not alone, and there's a bunch of resources. In fact, I've got a bunch of resources if you need them. So feel free to reach out to me for those as well. So what on earth was I thinking, though, leaving, against this backdrop of profound grief? I was leaving the safety of this corporate environment, but I honored my parents in the best way that I know how. And it's helping you find success in your business by using the power of storytelling. And that makes me super happy. And I just love doing it. So that's why I formed Go Narrative. And I've created those storytelling wheels that I couldn't find. And I've done it without using the hero's journey stuff. There's stuff out there that folks have tried to do it, and some of it's even somewhat effective, but I want to make it even easier. I want to give you the tools. I want to teach you to fish so that you can do this day in, day out. I literally was just over the moon yesterday to see a comment from one of our coaching clients that I coach one-on-one. And she was encouraging some other people in this community that we're both members in to come to my next session. There's a partner business community on LinkedIn, and happy to connect you to it as well. And she said the tools are super easy to apply, and they get results. And this was actually the same day I got an email from her where she was telling me that a partner of hers said that the wind wires that she were writing were brilliant stories. And seriously, nothing makes me happier. And that's why I formed Go Narrative. And the truth is, right, you don't need to check all those marketing boxes. You don't need all that latest fancy social media channels. By all means, you've got to figure out the channels at some point. But what you need first is better storytelling. Storytelling lights all those channels up. If you don't get your story straight, then those channels are going to fall flat. Now, remember that big misconception of storytelling that it's just for children, movies, and books? Remember, it's not. Those are just artifacts of what storytelling is really all about. And if some artifacts can be used for pure entertainment, some artifacts can be used for business engagement. That's what we've created. So when you apply storytelling the right way, you're more authentic. Your messaging is better. Your executives are more relatable. Have you ever known an executive who's not relatable inside a company or even outside? Not exactly the most positive of experiences, right? Your salespeople will have increased confidence. You'll generate increased demand, and then you'll accelerate that sales pipe velocity through your pipe. So all of those things are great, right? But even more importantly, as I alluded to earlier, everything is more aligned. And all those stories are aligned together, aligned to your business, aligned to the technology that you're trying to sell, the services that you're providing. And when everything is more aligned, everything has greater integrity. And integrity is essential for the best customer experiences. Sounds good, right? So I've seen this power and I wanted to spread the word, but those entertainment frameworks were just too hard. And even after the initial founding of Go Narrative, I hadn't built all the frameworks yet. So I was still playing that interpreter role and focused on decoding storytelling for you. To start off with, the focus was on this idea of a strategic messaging foundation, drawing on my product marketing background, value propositions, positioning messaging frameworks, that bridge between product and the market, the bridge between the engineers and marketing communications. All of these things fuel this idea of a strategic messaging foundation. And over time, I started to build more and more storytelling into it. And that stuff was great. And we made great money selling it. And we still sell those today. But obviously, they've been upgraded because what I was still on the hunt for was business storytelling. This was the crown jewel, business storytelling. Literature and film, they've got their frameworks. But those are just artifacts. Remember that those aren't what storytelling is. Storytelling is more basic, more fundamental, more natural than those. And that means that we can kind of turn the focus from that core, and we can go and create some artifacts that make sense for business and don't have all these bloody steps, right? And so at the end of the day, right, storytelling isn't just more than movies and books. It's how we make sense of the world. That's what I was touching on with the Will Storr Science of Storytelling comment. It's how we make sense of our world. It's how we figure out how to interact in our world. It's how we decide if we're a part of something. And it's how we make sense of our world. And we want our customers to make sense of us, right? You want your customers to make sense of you. Otherwise, they won't buy from you. But without simple, practical frameworks, I was still doing this interpreter thing. And that's when it really, really struck me. Storytelling is a value problem. And businesses, if about nothing else. It's about value, right? You buy something because it's got value to you, whether you're buying a piece of chapstick because your lips are a bit dry today, or you're investing hundreds of millions of dollars over multiple years on a cloud platform, right? It's all about value. It's like the jobs to be done methodology, jobs to be done. What am I hiring this thing to do? To keep my lips nice and moist, to write in a different color, to write in yet another color so that I can understand some different value in what I'm writing and that everything's not all of the same color, that there's some diversity within that. So, our ancestors, this idea of value was pretty simple. How to not get killed. That's pretty much it. So that involves finding shelter, finding the safe food to eat, staying away from the dangerous animals. Which of those berries is poisonous? Which one isn't poisonous? That's data. That's value. It's facts. But I discovered 2 cardinal sins, and in fact, I'm working on a third one. So at some point, come back and come to the presentation, and I'll share what the third one is. But they're these 2 big ones, right? And the first sin is not including people in the story. And there is a CMO of a major technology corporation who will go unnamed, who I was just floored by how he didn't recognize this. He's standing up on stage in his big coming out party and saying, we've got this great story and he's going to tell us what it is. And we're all leaning in. Our products work great together and our new SKUs and pricing are exactly as our customers need, blah, 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 blah. Huh? Okay, fact. Maybe value, but no wrapper, right? And that wrapper was story, and I waited for it. Didn't come. And this same CMO today, I see him posting on LinkedIn about this story, that story. He's like, where's the story? Still hasn't got it. So we can help with that. Anyway, so it's one example of what I was seeing storytelling being abused, right? People talk about this. This is our story. It's a product strategy. This is our story. It's a marketing priority. This is our story. It's a plan for moving into our increasing our presence in this market or that market, right? And it's just focus on logic and argument. And when you just focus on the facts and the logic and argument, and you don't bring emotion into it, you don't bring story into it, you inspire your audience to do something. And I'll tell you what that is. You inspire them to argue with you. So if all you focus on is argument, if all you do is pain proof, now I'm not saying you don't need to understand that stuff. When we create a positioning and messaging framework, we go through that exercise. But if that's all you focus on, and you don't focus on the experiences and the hearts and minds of your customers, then you are just going to encourage people to argue with you, and you will fail. So don't just focus on argument. It is a losing battle. And stories are about overcoming obstacles. They're about the people overcoming those obstacles. They're about the transformation those people go through overcoming those obstacles. And that's the why of storytelling. And again, it resonates with how our brains work. It resonates with how we experience reality. That's why it's so bloody important. Words are important. When this brand was released in the UK in the 90s, it caused quite a stir, shall I say. French Connection UK is what it stands for. What did you see, right? So don't say things are a story when they're not a story. You're not doing yourself any bloody favors, okay? You're doing yourself and your business and your customers a disservice, and you will leave money on the table and possibly even go out of business. So don't do it. What's that second sin? Okay, well, it's that value. It's that element of value. It's the head and the heart. When you bring this in as well, when you make sure you're thinking about the people and the obstacles are overcoming and the specific elements of value, right? What is that benefit, right? From the pain that you're helping solve, the job to be done, whatever it happens to be. People can see this simulated for the first time in a story. And technology companies who are bread and butter, because I love technology, and also tech companies tend to need the most help when it comes to storytelling, unsurprisingly, is simulation is a demo. That's right, a demo. Storytelling is your product demo, but it's your value demo, right? And it's your demo of how your customers overcome those problems. And I'll tell you why. It's because of how our brain works again. And if something's about how our brain works, we might want to listen to it. By the way, those sounds are going into our brains and getting processed in our brain. That's right. I love Jonathan Gottschall's quote about the virtual, about how fiction is an ancient virtual reality technology. There is a place for fiction in business. Okay, if you've got a great customer story, by all means, tell it. But you can also craft fiction that help people understand what it is that you can do for them. This is particularly important if you're an entrepreneur. You got to really think about that. What are those stories? What could it look like? Why are you doing this in the first place, right? And when we experience something, we remember it. And the next best thing to experiencing something is the demo. It's why every tech company, when they have that big presentation on stage, the executive is up there doing his little or her little thing, and it's like, "Hey, Bob, come on over. Let's bring out, bring Bob out, and we're going to do a demo. We're going to show you how this all works," right? And the best demos, by the way, have stories in them. And I remember created many of those when I was at Microsoft, and the story component is just as important as where you're clicking on the screen and which things are happening and where. So if you don't take this approach, right, and you try take entertainment storytelling, you're in this kind of square peg round hole situation. You're going to get frustrated. And I want to create a tool, a multi-tool for your business so that you can bring that heart in. And my dream was still there, and it still is. I want to get every single business person on this planet better at telling storytelling. That's a bit of a big goal, that one, but by God, man, I'm going to take it. So what if I could forge some frameworks specifically for business people? So my mother's earliest memory was her grandfather, my great-grandfather, taking her and her two sisters down to his smithy. He was a blacksmith. One of the many things he blacksmithed was he was a farrier for the horses in the First World War, in the trenches in France. My mother's earliest memory, though, was him taking her and her sisters down to his smithy under pain of death should they tell their mother, my gran. She would not have been happy. So he helped them. Literally, he helped them like thrust the metal horseshoes. He would do it with a horseshoe, thrust it into the fire, get it hot, put it on the anvil, and he would help them get the hammer, crash it down, because obviously they couldn't. My mum was 5. Like, crash the hammer down, sparks would fly. The steam, the heat, thrust it back into the water to temper it, and then all the steam would come out at that point and back into the fire, back onto the anvil, forge it again and again. Forging things takes work, but then when you've done it, you've got some tools. Like that anvil was forged, that hammer was forged, those tongs were forged, and then those could be used to create the horseshoe. So if I could forge the tools as story tools for you and give them to you, you could use those to then forge your stories in your business. And it was through the experience of forging these frameworks that I came up with them and can share them with you today. So I was on this mission to find this simplified way, right? Stay away from entertainment storytelling, make it accessible, make it repeatable so that you could use it every single day, right? Simple, accessible, repeatable, without relying on those entertainment frameworks. And I am pleased to report back from the front that I've done it and I've got these for you. And it means that whatever channel you're going to go after, you're able to come up with the stories first. And that's going to be the most important thing for you to do. And remember, I was playing that role of storytelling interpreter. I found this chap called Paul Smith, and Paul Smith probably got the closest to what I was looking for, but wasn't quite hitting the mark for me. He's got this book, Lead with Story. It's really great. And specifically, it's very targeted. Again, remember how Nancy DeWatt's is very targeted at presentations, and Bo Easton's very targeted at personal branding. Paul Smith has done a bunch of other stuff as well, but this one was focused on leadership. And he had these frameworks in there. And there's a car framework, which I quite liked, maybe because I like cars. It was context, action, results. But it wasn't quite enough. It wasn't quite hitting the right note for me. And in the end, I realized why. And it's actually quite simple. Stories are like salt. Salt is elemental. You have to forgive the tissue here, post-COVID, right? Salt is elemental. Without salt, food is bland, right? Some people even like to put it on watermelon. This is not as egregious as putting pineapple on a ham pizza. I still to this day do not understand that. I know some people like it, and I don't get it. Just don't get it. So some people like putting salt on watermelon. Jury's still out for me on that one. If I'm going to have a salty dessert, I would much prefer to have a salted caramel ice cream. I don't know about you. Answers on a postcard. Which one do you prefer? So I wanted to create some tools that are as simple as salt. Something that anyone could add to their communications dishes and even beyond communications. And, none of these tools matter, all these features or whatever, all these benefits, if they're not tasty, right? So your job is to make all of what you're trying to talk about and sell tasty. You've got to make it tasty. Don't prioritize the channels. Prioritize storytelling, make it tasty. Then you can talk about the channels. Now, some of you might be thinking, Matthew, come on, salt, too much salt is a bad thing. You're right, exactly. And that's why entertainment storytelling structures in business are the wrong way to go. They bring too much salt. So to avoid this too much salt situation, I prioritize to focus on three things. Focus on the customer, personas, guide decisions, demonstrate the overcoming of challenges, right? Remember, we talked about that earlier. The challenges that these personas have, and if you've got real examples, it's even better. Focus less on the product and service and more on the people whose lives and businesses your products impact. And quite frankly, business and life, right? They're the same thing, right? We're living because we work, and we work as we live. And so our experience as when we're working professionally is just as valid as the rest of our life. And so focus less on the products, on the features. If you do nothing else, start here. It's actually where I started when we think about crossing the chasm. So even if everything else today you think is too much, just focus less on your products and your features. You'll be off in a good direction. So we use this approach along with the sort of storytelling interpreter role that I had crafted for myself as we initially started Go Narrative to create things like sales presentations, websites, and other content. And as I was doing that, I was trying to figure out what these tools would look like. And it was great. So this is like our strategic messaging foundation that I mentioned earlier. And this also is a strategic messaging foundation that includes that strategic narrative. It's actually the narrative is here. We now call that strategic narrative. A master narrative is still relevant because it's your main narrative. But actually, what a narrative is it's your big story, right? So it's your company's big story, it's your product's big story. And you can have some nested narratives, but ultimately, as a company, that main narrative, that main story, that big story, that narrative, it's not just a passive thing. It is your strategy, right? And so it's your strategic narrative, your strategy is your story, right? And just love doing this work. And this is an example, like when we do a big project with all of the bits and pieces, sometimes we'll do personas, sometimes we'll do a strategic narrative. Sometimes a client comes to us and they've already done some research and we take that and we can interpret it. Sometimes we have to redo the research. But ultimately, what this gives you is it gives you the playbook, your go-to-market playbook, right? And the cool thing about focusing on personas and positioning frameworks is that they're the kind of components of business storytelling. So I was starting to uncover what I really needed to build these frameworks for you. And our clients, when they invest in these or use our playbooks, they see real results. A mid-size IT services firm saw consistency and unity across their marketing, their sales, and their service delivery in their consulting business. A corporate client saw over 40% increase in registration for their event series. They were surprised. Like, oh my God, it's this much more. And the change was, let's be intentional about our personas. Let's make sure that we're clear on the head with our PMF, and let's make sure we've got a narrative, and let's make sure that we look at the stories and experiences that those personas go through, and then all of that and fuel the content, the invitations, and everything that the websites and the mailers, any touch point that led to getting people to want to register. And it was massive, a huge uptick. Another client saw campaign landing page improvements with inbound, almost 4x increase in page views, and then over 7x increase in the actions that were happening on those pages. These are metrics that we as business people care about, right? When I'm looking at the gonarrative.com Google Analytics, these are things that I care about, right? This is important stuff for all businesses nowadays. This is what we live and breathe. But hey, what about a bit of fun? What about a video example from a client? So this is actually for an ad campaign, digital only ad campaign for one of our startup clients. Super, super cool, in the credit space, moving and shaking, doing some really, really cool stuff. And we've actually got one of those videos. We did 5 of these videos for them. We did soup to nuts. We helped them come up with the messaging framework, the narrative, the stories, and then focus in on each of those stories with those characters, those individuals within the business that are in the target audience, and see if you can detect some of what we've been talking about today as we fire this up.
Handling sensitive credit reporting data is stressful and complicated. Compliance and security issues are not trivial, and I didn't know that, for example, we can't share a credit report with the applicant or any other third party. CRS helps us navigate these waters, and now we move much more confidently.
If you're building an app, by the way, that needs to do anything financial related to do with credit, they're your folks. If you work with them, you won't have to deal with the big credit bureaus directly. CRS, your folks. Cool. So this is some real world application of what we're talking about today. And you probably noticed within there's this kind of idea of I've got this struggle, this challenge. I'm a person. I've got a struggle, a challenge I'm trying to overcome. I found something that helped me with that, and then these were the outcomes that I got. You talk about it like this, and you think, Matthew, this sounds like pretty basic stuff. I mean, and that's the thing with life, right? Things can be pretty simple, pretty basic when you look at them, when you break them down, and then you can create all sorts of wonderful stuff. We're going to talk about music in a little bit as well, and that Docutronica a line of work that we do, which is super fun. But my point about simplicity is, how many primary colors are there? 5. Think of all the art in the world, okay? NFTs as well, right? But anyway, think of all the art in the world. Music, how many notes on a scale? 12. What's your favorite song? What's this? I mentioned Watsky earlier today. Think of all the music in the world. A simple framework is the beginning of doing all sorts of very, very tailored and custom things that you can put out to the world. You need that with storytelling as well. And we've got the simplest framework as well that we're going to be sharing with you today for storytelling. So again, tools. My whole point about these frameworks, guys, is to craft some useful tools that you can use. Remember what I said about one of our coaching clients and what she said? They're simple, but I get results from them. I mean, that's what we want. And we use these to help our clients stand out, right? Make what they say and do interesting. Okay, hopefully from that little video you saw, there was some interest there. You got pulled into his story, started asking questions, right? It was interesting. And we're talking about credit, the credit space, and lots of numbers. And if you're dyslexic like me, that might not be the most exciting thing in the world, right? I love helping our clients find a better way to clarity and to connect with their customers. And I found all this through storytelling. It's no surprise, right? Our brains are wired for it. Our society is built on it. And where we live in Seattle, we're surrounded by water, okay? The archipelago of Puget Sound has over 170 islands. My wife and I fantasize about living on one, and we're super jealous because one of our friends actually just made that move. But we recently saw a property for sale on Vashon Island, where our friends moved to. Checked a bunch of boxes. So we packed the kids in the car, headed to the ferry terminal, and went and had a look. Oh my God. It looked kind of okay to start off with, but we noticed all these kind of like fundamental issues, like with the foundation and the doors weren't closing properly and all this kind of stuff. And having owned multiple homes, and I know how much work a home is, and if the foundation's not good, it's not going to be, you're not setting yourself up for success, as we would say in business, right? My parents had a 450-year-old farmhouse, and houses, they're a lot of work, but if they've got good bones, if they've got a good foundation, if they've got a good framework, they can last for 450 years. By the way, it's made out, that 450-year-old farmhouse, made out of stones, same stones as Stonehenge. The house on Vashon was a far cry from this, right? And it reminded me of the importance of a great framework, right? And a great framework is going to give you a strong foundation. It's going to be simple that you can build on, and it'll be practical, right? You can use it again and again and again. People aren't reinventing the idea of a house foundation. They're pretty similar. If you go look at any building site, you could be looking at any building site, right? They're all very similar. People aren't exactly innovating every day in foundations. Now, if you work in the building industry, I'm sure you could argue with that and say, well, Matthew, there's this thing we do with concrete. Now, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the general aspect of it. Okay, so don't be picky about that. Okay, I don't know anything about building a house's foundation apart from they all look the same. Anyway, I'm just kidding. So, if you get your storytelling right, you don't have to worry as much about what channel or marketing method you're using. The right business storytelling framework helps you get attention, right? And be heard after getting some, you got my attention. Okay, now I'm listening to you, right? Now I'm listening to you. And then drive some kind of action, and that action, right, ultimately results in somebody buying from us. And as a business, that's what we're trying to do. That's why we're in business, right? So, by the way, that house on Vashon eventually sold for 20% less in a market where most houses are actually selling for 20% more. So that's a problem when you don't have a good foundation. Don't let it happen to you with your business storytelling. So storytelling is a communications multi-tool. And the good news is you don't need all those latest social media channels, and you don't need to be like scrambling to get into the metaverse. I have to get into the metaverse right now. Whatever platform you use, and eventually when you actually have a strategy and a story to go into the metaverse with, if you ever do that, I don't know. I think, are people more interested in spending time outside right now? I don't know about you, but I deleted my Facebook account. I don't need that anymore. I want to connect with real people, and so it's gone. So you can't find me on Facebook anymore, but I am on LinkedIn. Anyway, so this is a secret that I'm about to share. In fact, we've got 3 secrets. So, and they all pivot around some beliefs that we've seen. So one false belief we hear is, okay, Matthew, get it, got it. Good storytelling may be a powerful way to communicate, may be entertaining, but it's just too hard to apply to our business. Every time I try and use the hero's journey in marketing, it's too complicated, too much to do, it's too much lift, I have too much to worry about, and I don't have time to do this stuff. I know, I get it. And that leads us to secret number 1. It's a quick and easy story hack to help you increase profitability without learning all the nuances of entertainment storytelling. You don't have to do it. You access its power without ever having to say the word hero. If you want to say the word hero, it's okay, but you don't have to. Another false belief that we often hear is, okay, I get it. You sold me on storytelling. Of course, this makes a lot of sense. I understand your most basic of frameworks, which we're going to get to in just a second, but I can't seem to create stories at work. My stories don't seem to have a heart. I have so many product benefits to get across. I can't find, let alone fit in, realistic emotions that will make my story interesting and appealing to actual human beings, not just search engines, right? The dark side of SEO. So hence secret number 2, a way to build and tell confident business stories that connect with the hearts and the minds of your customers. There's also another false belief, and that is, okay, Matthew, I get it, but I can't get the support or the funding or the political clout that I need because I just can't show how storytelling connects to my business or how all my stories, how do I get all my stories to align and connect together so that my horse is pulling the wagon in one direction? And that leads us to secret number 3. Tell the right story. Figure out how to tell the right story to connect your audience to your product, move your customers to act, and deeply connect to your business so you can get the support that you need to actually go and do what you want to do with storytelling. So let's talk about Secret number one, take out your pen and paper to take notes, take some screenshots. I will walk you through this framework, and I call it the 3D story framework. As questions come up, go ahead and fire them in. We'll see if we can weave them in. And if not, we'll tackle them at the end. So remember, I didn't want this entertainment storytelling thing, not trying to rewrite Shakespeare here, are we? Come on. This is about business storytelling, and that we couldn't find this how-to. We couldn't find the wheel that would roll, and there's just too much salt when we were looking at the entertainment frameworks. But we knew that if we can forge a simple framework, it can be your foundation, right? And it can unlock what you're seeking to do here. And I wanted to keep the excitement, I want to keep the entertainment. Look, your stories should be entertaining. That's different to being for entertainment, okay? End goals. We all know that in business. What are we trying to achieve, right? We're not just trying to entertain. We're trying to move people, to change minds. It's more like a documentary or a work of art than it is pure entertainment, right? And I know that with the right frameworks, you can shape your world, especially because storytelling is about how we perceive the world, right? And you can do this even if you're not a natural born storyteller, right? Because it's a communications tool for internal alignment, pitching your ideas to your boss, exploring product strategy, crafting product position, coming up with narrative, a strategic narrative for your company, ad campaigns, so on and so forth. And again, none of that kind of entertainment frameworks. It's all about business, right? So what does it look like? Are you ready? Are you ready for this framework? Matthew, come on, cut to the damn chase. Let's go full screen for you as well, so you can actually see this in all its glorious detail. Here it is. This was our first framework, the 3D framework. It is practical. It is straightforward, and it helps you see your story from all angles. When I watch a webinar and somebody's drinking, I'm like, really? You didn't hydrate enough beforehand? It's like, actually, I get it. When talking and your mouth dries out, especially post-COVID. That's my excuse, and I'm sticking to it. So anyway, when I drew some inspiration from a pretty popular tagline for this one, which also happens to be 3 words, but it's Nike's "Just Do It." Why did this inspire me? It packs so much into just 3 words, packing important stuff in a way that represents those 3 words. And in fact, triggers a story in your mind. I actually use the "Just Do It" tagline as an example for story making and triggering stories, and how whilst a story includes people and overcoming of challenges, and the words "just do it" don't mention a person, don't mention a challenge. It's about you and what you're going to do to overcome something, whether it's me getting my butt off the sofa to go swimming, which obviously didn't happen during COVID, or it's the Michael Phelps extreme example of swimming, or getting the 8th, 9th, 10th, 50th, 100th gold medal, or whatever it is that he got. So Nike's "Just Do It" really inspired me to pack a lot into just 3 words. So 3D stands for desire, difficulty, and denouement. That fancy French word. I love it for 2 very specific reasons I'll get to in a second. But in a nutshell, people, the hero, right, as you would hear in entertainment parlance, your customer, okay, wants something. That's the desire. But life isn't easy. My tummy's actually grumbling. I'm hungry. I want some food. What stands in my way? I got to make sure, first of all, I got to give you all this good stuff that I'm giving you today. And then I got to figure out, do I have something in the fridge? And if I don't, I have to figure out where I'm going to get food. And then when I figured out where I'm going to get food, I have to either go and get it or order it and go and get it. And I got to take time out of the office. Stuff always stands in the way, no matter how simple a task. And then I chose that fancy French word denouement because it means the untangling of the knot. What a beautiful metaphor. I'm also a metaphor junkie, by the way. We talk a lot about metaphors at Go Narrative. But what a wonderful metaphor. How was it untangled? With what? Was a specific approach used? Don't do a 9-year-old Matthew and use scissors as your tool to cut through a knot which is on a kite string. So you want to use the right tools. And of course, we want your clients, your customers, to use the tools that you're selling, the products and the services that you're selling, right? And in my story journey, I really knew the importance of change, right? Of contrast, of transformation. I also knew that every business decision is a transformation. big or small. And if people can easily understand the why and the how of another person's solution to a similar problem, to a similar transformation, that demo, they could be persuaded to follow the same path, a path to purchase from you. Okay, so we designed this framework to be deceptively simple, right? A rich microcosm of nuances, details, and context packed into 3 simple words. For all those years as a story interpreter in business, I knew that if you pulled on the correct threads, you'd extract what was needed to construct a story. And a good story puts you in the center. And those 3 words just do just that. They tease a transformation and present it in a way that allows you and your customers to see the detail that they need, right? And nothing else. So this is it. The most simple of story frameworks on the planet. I challenge you to find one that's simpler. And again, beginning, middle, and end doesn't count. Beginning. What do I do at the beginning? Middle. Oh, I do something in the middle. End. I wrap it up. What? Not particularly helpful, is it? And what's the extreme? Joseph Campbell's monomyth, 17 steps. Okay, give me a break, right? 3 steps. People want something stands in the way, and then how do they untangle that to get what they wanted? Okay, 3D framework. Use it tonight. Tell the story to your family, your friends. Pick up a phone, call somebody. Tell the story of your day using this framework. So it should come as no surprise. We use this all day, every day for our marketing. We use it in the creation of this presentation. And we use it for client work as well. Here's an example of a landing page for a major financial services firm. And you can see how it maps out here. The desire, the difficulty, and the denouement, making sure that we tell the story in the right sequence and have the right information in it. We also use it to break down the information for value propositions, creating train the trainer guides, and also coaching our clients. Remember that coaching client? This is the first tool, obviously, the first framework that we go through in our coaching to help you apply it. So whilst it might be true that we're all natural born storytellers and we're all living our story, right? It's also true that it's different spinning a yarn about somebody cutting you off on the motorway than it is to define a strategic narrative for your company. The latter is a little bit harder. I love this quote from Ben Horowitz, famous VC, right? Storytelling is important and it takes work, it takes forging, but we've created the tools, the anvil, and the hammer, so that your forging can be focused on the horseshoe and not on the anvil and not on the hammer. We've created that for you, right? And this framework is a tip of an iceberg, right? We use this to extract, to dig deeper, to pull this information out. And I've got a surprise coming for you at the end of the presentation. If you want to stick around, I hope you will. I know we've already gone over an hour, but I love this stuff and I hope you're loving it as much as I am, because we've actually got something. We've got something in that storytelling for action stuff that's going to help with all this. And it really is really cool. So stick around for it. Okay, great. So I got story structure down, Matthew, all good to go. I know how to tell the story, desire, difficulty, denouement, ready to rock and roll. Stories need emotion. We must feel the story. We have to care about a story. We have to care about the characters in the story. Don't get me wrong. I will use entertainment as a metaphor for business. I'm not saying use the entertainment frameworks, but I'll use it as a metaphor. Think of a movie that you didn't like. Think of a movie where there was a character you didn't like, that you just couldn't get behind, right? You're not going to like that story. We have to feel it. We have to connect, right? So remember, I told you that story earlier about a way to do this, or a framework, I should say. Well, emotions are an essential ingredient in moving people to act, to buy from you, right? It's that the head and the heart of the whole thing. And it can just be too much to try and figure it out. So we recognize the need to create a framework to help with this, okay? And the beauty of how we've designed our frameworks is they're little stepping stones, okay? Not to dump on Paul Smith, but his car framework was the first part in the rest of what I can't remember, because it was car equals and then a whole bunch of other letters. Now we are going to go through 3 frameworks today, but each one of those builds on the previous one. And as long as you can just remember the 3D framework, you will be able to start using storytelling in a repeatable manner in your business to drive results. But I also wanted to make sure that you had something to extract those emotions. And I experienced this in my role as a story interpreter after I left corporate America, and agonized over the first strategic narrative that we created, right? Emotions matter. Like I was going through emotions, creating this narrative. I was super nervous when we landed it with the client. Luckily, they loved it. And the narrative metaphor was an eagle soaring above the landscape, because the CEO of this company was very much a look at the big picture, look at all the components type of person, very much core to how they operated, and made a lot of sense. So that was a big part of the strategic narrative. Emotions are important. So I was lucky enough, this is my gran I mentioned earlier, and I was lucky enough that my grandmother lived in the same village as my parents when I was at university, and in the twilight years of her life. And this was lovely because it meant that when I was coming back from uni, I could visit her, right? And speaking of uni, I struggled at university. Maybe it was my bright, shiny object syndrome. Maybe it was my ADHD. Maybe it was my dyslexia. Maybe it was all of those things. Anyway, I found it tough. One day on a visit back home, I stopped by my gran's for a cup of tea. Ain't no party like my nana's tea party. Hey, ho. Some of you might get the Flight of the Conchords reference here. If you don't know who Flight of the Conchords are, I highly recommend you learn. Go watch them. They're on HBO. I'm sure there's some YouTube clips. Flight of the Conchords, and they've spawned a whole bunch of other entertainment out of this. And Taika Waititi, pronounce his name correctly, is involved in a bunch of stuff, including like the new Marvel movies. He actually played the Rock character in Thor Ragnarok. He's directed some of the Boba Fett. I don't know actually. Is he going to do those? He did Mandalorian though. He did some Mandalorian episodes, and he's a collaborator with the Jerome and Brit from Flight of the Conchords. So highly recommend it. Some really, really good fun entertainment. Anyway, so my gran says to me during tea with my gran, she says, Matthew, if degrees are easy, they would hand them out after A-levels. A-levels are the equivalent of the last 2 years of high school in the USA. So she was right? Made me think of my mother's Forge story. No, I didn't. I didn't spill the beans. I didn't spill the beans. So I kept her comments in mind. Nothing worth working for is a handout. But if I could do the bulk of the hard work, if I could forge these frameworks for you, if I could forge a framework for getting emotions into your stories, if I, maybe that's the anvil or maybe that's the hammer, whatever, then you wouldn't have to worry about those. You could focus on and using those to get out what you needed. And to do it in a way that's not as complex or detailed as a hero's journey, right? Complexity can actually hamper creativity. Remember the 5 primary colors, 12 notes example. You don't need a lot of complexity. A complex framework can distract from something critical to storytelling as well. Because when you get wrapped up in complex frameworks and speeds and feeds and data, blah, 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 emotions are often the first thing to be left by the wayside. So during the early days of COVID, I figured it out, right? It hit me. The importance of the right emotions in business. Not all emotions are created equal. We needed to come up with a way to help people extract the right emotions, because it's not all like I'm happy or I'm sad. There's some nuances to that. So it was in those early days with the rest of the planet trying to keep calm and carry on that I felt this new framework coming on. And speaking of emotions, by the way, our family loves Star Wars, prequels, sequels. Don't judge me on the prequels. Toys, we have more Star Wars Lego than you can shake a stick at, and frequently standing on them and hurting my feet. I've even met George Lucas twice, but that's another story, and I'm happy to tell it to you if you want to reach out one-on-one. I remember reading an article about the lightsaber battles in Star Wars and how the actors had to practice because most of them had no sword fighting experience, right? Now, one of them did. That was Christopher Lee, who was actually doing sword fighting not only before all the other actors in Star Wars, before many of us were born. This was 1973's The Three Musketeers. Now, the thing is that you'll realize when you watch Christopher Lee playing Count Dooku in the prequels is his own style, right? He brings his own emotion. It's not just parry, block, slice. There's a character to it, and he brings that character into the character of Count Dooku. And ultimately, this is what we're talking about with business: the importance of being able to bring the right character into the story so that they resonate with your customers, and breathing that life into a story. This is how we do it, by bringing the right emotions in. And again, it's not about happy or sad or anger or frustration. In business, you've probably heard fear, uncertainty, and doubt, right? Yes, those are valid emotions, but it's not just that. Those are kind of the entry, right? The baseline, the base level. I want to help you go beyond that and to identify the right ones that are really going to resonate with who you're talking to. And the first place that I started to ask this question was, what are the truths of the transformation or the change, right? We talked about storytelling being like going through a change, going through a transformation. So what are the emotions that are associated with that? What is being forced on your customers? Because transformation makes us react, right? The metaverse is, we've used that example a couple of times today. You hear about the metaverse and you're going to react to it, right? A lot of people are like, well, that's, Second Life has existed for 20 years, or is that just another word for cyberspace? Right? We're reacting to these things that get pushed onto us. And the good news is that we created a way for you to do this, and I call it the story meet method. You got to meet your customers where you are. You ready to actually see this framework? Okay, here we go. I've kept the screen nice and big as we've gone through this, so you can see this. Here we go. If you understand what moves people to act, you can craft stories that will trigger that action. And emotions are key to this. So with Meet, you don't need to maintain all those complicated steps of the hero's journey to figure out the emotions. It's effectively a simple hack, these 3 components to help you find the right emotions. So what do they stand for? Well, morals, also values is in here, but Veet didn't sound quite as good as Meet, and you don't Veet your customers where they are. And I wanted to create tools and frameworks that are going to be really easy to remember. But morals, values, right? Morals, your customer's perspective on the good, the bad, the indifferent. Is this, like, take the metaverse example. How do you feel about that? Do you feel like we should be spending all our time online trapped? We are now, kind of, aren't we? But or do you think we should be spending more time outside? There's morals that you've got about how you should be spending your life. Essential emotions. What are those essential emotions? The feelings that exist for your audience around any given topic. In this case, that transformation that's happening in the world that your product or service helps with. So what are those essential emotions? And getting really focused on what the essential ones are. That's key. And that word essential is key there, because there's actually a lot of emotions, right? One of the things we love to do is go and geek out on emotions when we're working on doing work for our clients. But as far as you're concerned, I want to make it super, super easy. So what are those essential emotions? And remember, I said we've got something really, really cool to share with you in a bit. That is going to help with all of this in great detail in a simple way. So it's beautiful. Anyway, what about truths? What does that mean? Concepts that your audience holds near and dear, central to their decision-making, regardless of the topic. These could be cultural norms. For example, the way people do business in the Philippines or in Europe or in South America or in North America are different, right? There are truths to the context of what our customers are experiencing, and context is important for the stories that you're telling. It's why Paul Smith talks about context, action, and results. But here we go. How do you meet your customer where they are, right? Morals, essential emotions, and truths. And don't forget, when you think morals, values can be a part of that as well. And this really becomes that iceberg hack to help you cut open this big, complicated, hairy topic and get really focused on what the important stuff is for your customer. And when you do that, you just start pulling at that thread, right? You're going to unravel what can be a very complex cardigan of emotions, and you'll do that in no time. Okay, so you get your emotions right. You build empathy. With empathy, you can create engagement. And this is so important for any of our businesses, right? If we piss somebody off, they're not going to have any empathy for us. They're not going to connect with us. They're going to walk in the other direction, right? So the opposite of that, though, is when we make people super happy. And I love this example from one of our clients, Hannah from And Plus. This is a sort of quote that we live for, right? When we help people feel empowered, when we help them get clarity and help them connect with their clients, it makes our day. Okay, remember, like we talked about these first 2 secrets, and that third one was, okay, Matthew, I can tell them some stories, I've got some emotion in them. How do I make sure this connects deeply to my business so that I can sell it internally, so that I can ensure that all my stories are aligned, that my sales force, my marketing team, even my product teams, everybody is on the same page? How do I do that? What is it that I'm going to do? And it really comes back to this idea of the why of storytelling. In fact, if you go and search for the why of storytelling, and in fact, just go Google storytelling, not now, I want you to pay attention, of course, later, hit I'm lucky. And it's highly likely the first article that's going to come up is this HubSpot article. So save it for later, go ahead and read that later on. But not to throw HubSpot under the bus. And they've been one of the shining examples of content marketing. But when you read this specific article, you'll notice a few things. Number one, it's not structured based on story. And there also isn't a story to be found anywhere in it. And I know this because I've analyzed the article. We do this quite a lot, right? I'm a geek for it, right? So that you don't have to be. And I'm sure you'll realize now why I'm on a mission to empower every single business person on the planet to become a better storyteller. And you'll realize it when you look at this article, and you'll also realize I've got a lot of work to do. The power of story goes so far beyond just storytelling. Okay. We can use it to shape our world. We've talked about that a bit today. I remember January of 2017. In fact, happy birthday, Go Narrative. We're just gone 5 years old a couple of weeks ago. I sat with my wife on the sofa, and we were talking about what to call the company. The reason why we're called Go Narrative and not Go Story or Story Action or something like that is because of the big story. You've got a big story, and a big story is a narrative, and that big story shapes and defines all of the other stories you tell. So go back to the very beginning of what we were talking about today, sales and marketing. Do you want those two parts of your organization saying the same thing, or do you want them off doing different things, right? That's what this is all about, creating that foundation so that everybody in your business is saying the same thing. And it goes actually beyond that, because this is about what is the living, breathing story of the company. You can use your strategic narrative to make product decisions. Innovative, brilliant engineer comes up with an idea. Should we do this? Well, is that congruent? Does that align with what our story is? And if it's not, we shouldn't do that, right? And maybe do something else or take that to a place where it makes sense if you're passionate about that. It's super important stuff, right? So there's this paradox, right, of storytelling isn't just storytelling, right? And I needed a way to tie all this together and make sure it was rooted in the business so we could help our clients ultimately build that clarity, build that alignment. And that beyond storytelling is narrative. It's about the big picture, right? Again, using an example from the movies without using the frameworks of the movies, your favorite movie will include a collection of stories. Think about the last movie you saw. There was probably 3, 4, maybe even 5 stories in it. And they all accrue up to the overall big story, the narrative of the film. So this led me to having 2 fundamental questions. Firstly, how do we create authenticity by tying all these stories together with this golden thread? But that led me to an even more profound question. And that question is, how do we ensure that the stories we tell are the correct stories? Stories that matter for the business, stories that drive action in the business, whilst feeding that authenticity. So I hope that you're starting to see how businesses have different demands on storytelling than entertainment, the movies and books, right? And that's why we need these tools for business storytelling. And when we have these tools for business storytelling, our business stories can be so much more powerful, aligned, impactful, relatable, build empathy, build engagement, right? So in those early days of solving this business storytelling problem, I became hooked, right? I just geeked out tons and tons and tons. You recall how I talked about the problems I ran into. I remember sitting down with my general manager and trying to talk about the hero's journey. Didn't go too well. Too much salt, right? What we talked about with the salt issue earlier on. I can almost taste the curse of knowledge, taste too much salt, right? Most business people, you don't necessarily have time. If you do, if you love storytelling, more power to you. But most, it's highly likely you don't, right? You just want to get the benefits of storytelling without having to learn how to write the Lord of the Rings, right? You want to use it to improve your product marketing, your campaigns, your sales plans, your partner events, and even manage your office politics, dare I say. It's a part of my origin story I haven't gone into today. And it was about how to navigate the corporate environment and using storytelling to do that. So if it's if it isn't immediately obvious how all of all your stories you're telling connect back to your business, you've got a problem. So how do you do that? Where do I start? You might be thinking, how do I create this big story? It sounds big, it sounds complicated. I get the 3D framework, Matthew, but what about this? Is there something you can share? Well, of course there is. And this is where the paradox of storytelling manifests. If you just focus on telling a story, you're not going to get the most out of story. Okay. The driving force, remember, behind storytelling is how our brain works. And as Will Storr says in The Science of Storytelling, I've read it, so you don't have to, but it's great. So not to dismiss Will, if you want to read it, if you want to geek out on it, by all means do, but you don't have to, right? He talks about how, not just about how our brain works, but how it works to help us get along with each other in society and get ahead in society. And our brains are doing that story making all the time. And so that's why this is so fundamental. And our big story is a part of that. So remember, even with this thing that's so natural and simple, we can use it every day, just like salt. People try and apply these frameworks and fail and give up. The salt gets spilt. Throw it over your shoulder, is it? Most cases, people only dabble, sprinkle a little story into some presentations or to some content. I want you to get out of the jar. I love this quote. Apparently it comes from the US South. I want to help you get out of the jar, right? To see what storytelling really is. Think of your favorite movie. Think of all those multiple stories, right? There's also a moral or a metaphor, and that's super key, right? We talked about Nike's Just Do It and how that inspired me to create the 3D framework. It's also a metaphor for motivation. And 3D framework, desire, difficulty, denouement, untangling of the knots, a metaphor, right? And so the process of figuring out your big story is also figuring out, what is that discrete metaphor? How can we use that metaphor as a shortcut to understanding so people just get what we're all about? And I just love this quote because it speaks to that. Now, a really, really good example of narrative is to use a book. I've read this to my youngest recently, and I discovered that there's like a whole 16 books in the Oz universe. It's crazy. So Wizard of Oz, right? You've got these characters who all want something. Dorothy wants to get home. The Scarecrow wants brains. The Tin Man wants a heart. The Lion wants courage. But when you read the story in particular, it doesn't come across quite as well in the movie. But when you read the story, you really realize that each of these characters has what they want all along. The Lion's protecting everyone. The Scarecrow is solving the problems. The Tin Man is showing compassion for his fellow travelers. And it turns out that it was a dream all along. So Dorothy had what she needed, but it was really her motivation, and she had it within her pursuit of getting home. They all had it all along, right? And so that's the metaphor for Wizard of Oz. You have inside of you what you need to be successful in life. So that's the metaphor. And it can be hidden sometimes, right? As it may have been for you with Wizard of Oz. But if you can intentionally figure that out for your business, whether you explicitly talk about it or not, all the content you create, all the coaching you do, all the onboarding, the recruiting, everything you do as a business will have alignment and integrity. That is the power we're talking about here. It's so much further than applying the hero's journey to a marketing campaign. Now, I love the metaphor of a brick wall as well, right? You never see a brick wall because bricks are like what? They're about that thick, the average brick, like that kind of size. You never see a wall. There's like one piece of it's fired clay. It's clay that's been put in an oven. You never see a wall that's that big. Could you make one? I don't know. Maybe that's too hard, but that's not why we don't do it. We don't do it because it's brittle. It would break. But something magic happens when you put the mortar between all these bricks. It's because of the way the forces, gravity, and also the resistance of each of these bricks against each other. And that makes a strong wall. That mortar is your narrative. When you figure that out, every brick you put in the wall is going to stick together. And you won't put bricks in the wall that aren't going to stick. What makes the mortar? It's the meaning of your business. When we create a strategic narrative, we draw it out from areas like all across the business. We speak to product, speak to PR, we speak to the executive team, all that good stuff. Because you're looking at what's changing in the world, right? What stories are we telling? What are the trends? What are the facts? What are the opportunities? What does that picture look like? We can break it all down. And the storytelling for action stuff that we're getting to, the big reveal that's coming up, is it helps you do all of that, helps you extract all of this wonderful information. And by doing this, you're not just peppering in a bit of storytelling in your presentations or your ad campaigns or whatever you're doing, right? It's a consistency of what you're doing. And I've mentioned Ben Horowitz today. We see eye to eye on the storytelling stuff, I got to say, because in good companies, the story and the strategy are the same thing. And your story, your big story, your strategic narrative, that is what shapes all the stories you tell. And when you do that, you can lead the whole organization towards a common goal. Are you ready for the third and final framework that we're going to share today? Okay, got it. And here it is. It is the TRIPS storytelling methodology. And I'll go through each one of these briefly so that you can understand each of the components. That transformation, we talked about that today, right? Stories are about change. The world's changing. We make stuff to help with the world changing. That changes the world even more. And there's all this change going on, all these products, right? So how do we cut through that noise? But first, we need to understand, what is that transformation? Then what are the reasons we should believe this transformation? Is there some data, some facts, right? Storytelling does include some data and facts, right? In fact, it needs to, as we talked about the head and the heart together early on. So there's also reasons to believe, like, why should I care? Is there something inspirational or aspirational? Maybe there's some social proof in there that we can share that somebody's achieved. That can be a pretty damn good reason to believe, right? If anybody had an actual metaverse story that made me want to be in the metaverse, maybe I'd consider it. Not happening so far. Maybe somebody needs some help with that. I don't know. Not going to help certain people though. Anyway, so once you've got that, what is the sort of magic that you bring? What is the innovation you bring? Maybe it's a feature. Maybe it's a specific type of product. Amazon, actually, when you look at Amazon, you ask, what's innovative? Why were they so successful? What's that kind of key part of their narrative? It's actually their customer support. So no questions asked customer support. Because quite frankly, yeah, you could argue with AWS and so on, this from a technology and an innovation perspective. Amazon is a website to buy stuff from. It's an online store. How do you stand out? How do you cut through the noise? How do you have something that people want more than other people? That's your innovation. You got to figure out what that is. What's that one thing? A value proposition exercise, a positioning messaging framework exercise will help you figure that out. And that's actually why we end up doing these two things together with our clients. Because if you just create the strategic narrative and just like old game, new game, right? Okay, well, you'll get so far with that, but you do need to think about the head part of this as well. Super, super important. And then what are the problems? Because I tell you what, that transformation imposes problems on people. And then if you decide, I'm going to deal with this transformation, there's problems dealing with the transformation. And then as you go along, there's problems that crop up along the way. TRIP, but it's TRIPS, YS, because in every one of the previous letters, I want you to look for stories. Can you find a story that articulates the transformation? Can you find a story that represents a reason to believe? The aspiration and inspiration one's particularly important there. Innovation. Can you tell a story about your founder, your company? Why does this company exist in the first place? Problems. Here is a great place if you've got some social proof from case studies. If not, fiction is a valid tool and a valuable tool as well. So make sure you're looking through the stories lens for transformation, reasons to believe, innovation, and the problems as well. Now, sometimes it just kind of happens, right? Because the stars align, the unicorn is born, and you could try and just roll the dice if you want. But if you follow these frameworks, you're not just rolling the dice. You have a method. You have an approach. It's simple. It's accessible. It's repeatable. You can keep doing it again and again and be successful every single time. So when you craft narratives with the TRIPS storytelling methodology, you will frame your strategy and transformation and how it relates to the market. You'll harvest the proper inputs. You'll build the golden thread that weaves everything together. Then you'll use the 3D framework to tell the stories and the MEAT framework to bring those emotions into them. We actually use the trip story methodology externally to diagnose our clients. This is like our X-ray machine to figure out what's going on, and let alone when we do a strategic narrative project, right? So you can use this framework to understand a problem as well. This again, right? We'll store. We're trying to get along and get ahead in the world. We're trapped in this bone prison. It's dark in there. There's no sound. There's vibrations. There's some sound of vibrations, but our ears, our eyes, our taste, our touch, our smell, those senses, those sensors that go into our brain, we build this picture of the world and then we operate on it. So you can also use these tools to then analyze your customers' lives, businesses, and then create a narrative that overlaps between you and your customers. Now, the One Ring to Bind Them All, again, that's my mum's copy of Lord of the Rings, 1969 edition, is a strategic narrative. So sometimes we call this a narrative pack as well. This is our strategic narrative, and this is where all that comes together, or the magic comes together. And the metaphors, the stories, the shortcuts to understanding, and the narrative itself that's focused on your customers and on the market. So after we applied our frameworks, we saw deals like literally 10x in size, and multiple storytelling services. Super great, fantastic. My journey on storytelling went from those entertainment stories to the hero's journey, to science, to cogs of society, and how our brain works, right? And how all these things tie together. So that's where this stuff comes from. I learned how to align the stories we're telling to the business through narrative and ultimately unlock this. Now, if you joined us a couple weeks ago, you would have enjoyed a little video that we shared, which I believe we still have loaded up into our system here, because there's something about all of these things and how it all comes together, and ultimately the emotions that get triggered. And I was going to share this with you, and it should be in here. Let's see. Okay, is it this one? If I press the wrong button, I'm going to come back in and press it again. So we'll give it a shot, and if not, we'll see demos. We talk about demos today. Sometimes demos go wrong, don't they? We'll see if this is the right one. Storytelling is important in business, just like it's important in real life. Story is important because it's how we make sense of the world around us. Storytelling is essential. Storytelling is what bonds us. Stories are how we make sense of the world. Every single human being constructs their entire world with story. Stories resonate with us. Without story, we can't communicate and we can't understand. Even a loving embrace and a hug that gives you a deep, warm feeling is giving you a deep, warm feeling because you're putting that into a story in your mind about what that means to you. Stories connect in a way unlike any other information. You will communicate in a way that people not only understand, but care about. A data sheet or a PowerPoint presentation that isn't fueled by story is nothing to care about. A great story affects you. A great story affects you. A storyteller will know that their message is connecting with an audience because that audience will lean in. And when people lean in, they want to know more, they want to engage, and they want to act. Storytelling is important in business, just like it's important in real life. Stories are literally the bridge between people. The bridge between people. Storytelling is what bonds us. Stories are literally the bridge. Stories are how we make sense of the world. Fantastic. So there we go. We're triggering emotions. We've got alignment. We're connecting with our customers. So if I ask you a question, if you follow what I showed you in Secret One and you started telling stories consistently every day and writing and building stories for your business, and you used what I shared in Secret Number 2 and you drew emotion into those stories, and then you took what I shared in Secret Number 3 and you created alignment with all the stories deeply aligned to your business, deeply aligned to each other in everything you say and do. Do you think you could maybe drive more demand and accelerate your sales pipe? So how many of you are feeling excited right now? Fantastic, right? How many of you feel like you're drinking from a fire hose, right? You know, it's so true. I remember having this presentation training years ago. It's like, Matthew, you're an expert, you know the product, the business, blah, blah, blah. You're never going to communicate everything in an hour. Your job is to get people to take an action, right? And so that is what storytelling for action is all about. Here it is, storytelling for action. We're launching this. We're on the verge of publishing the book, so you can actually buy this book. It's the tools you need to extract and go through everything we've talked about today. And it ultimately includes recipes and ingredients. There's like 14 how-to flows and over 300 hacks that will help you accelerate getting into storytelling for business. Here is a quick sneak peek of some of how it looks like. You can see that we lead you through the process. We give you the worksheets, all of that good stuff. We even provide the flow to create a strategic narrative itself, and ultimately use the trips and the 3D framework to bring these things to life. You can be one of the first people to get access to Storytelling for Action. You can sign up at this link below. And all you need to get to start applying storytelling in business, right? There's 6 playbooks, 12-part course we've got the templates so you can use with your team, lifetime access to our clinic, and a bonus customer advocacy pack. So our mission is to help you harness the power of storytelling, and to do that for every single business person on the planet. So based on that, questions. Thank you so much for joining today. I'm so excited for Storytelling for Action. I'm going to stick around for a few minutes if you've got any questions. And got a couple come in here. So why don't you have heroes or things like that in your frameworks? Well, it's embedded into the frameworks, and we want to avoid that entertainment lingo and complexity. We want to make this super simple and easy and accessible for you. So that's why you won't hear us using that. On occasion, as a metaphor, we might, but in general, you won't see that in our frameworks. Is there a difference between transformation and change? Well, they're basically the same thing, but transformation we tend to talk about as a sort of a bigger change, like societal level, technology level, and change we tend to talk about more of the sort of granular level, specifically individuals and businesses, and how you can help them change what they're doing and the way that they're working. They're fundamentally the same thing, but it's different altitudes, if you will. What's the biggest mistake people make with storytelling? Well, there's 2. One is not understanding storytelling enough to use it effectively, or having the tools to do so. I remember that CMO example. Doesn't tell stories, says it's a story and isn't. And then the second is following those entertainment structures and getting lost, putting it off, and ultimately not benefiting from it all. So that's the other big one. Anyway, thank you so much. It has been an absolute joy and a pleasure to go through all of this with you today. It is your cheat sheet to telling storytelling in business. And let us know how you get on, okay? And don't forget to sign up for Storytelling for Action so that you can go ahead and get access as soon as we release it. We're going to get that book published. We've got that all the trainings we're getting that finished off, all this fantastic stuff. And the Facebook's gone, actually. I need to remove that from the slide because we have deleted Facebook. Boom, we are gone from Facebook. We no longer want to feed into that part of humanity. Okay, fantastic. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful rest of your day. And I hope you're going to be as much of a story addict as I am moving forward. So story addicts away. Have a good one.